Anyone with a cell phone probably knows about the potential to be tracked as it pings off cell towers while they go about their business. But there is a deeper, more insidious kind of tracking, too, that technology increasingly makes possible and can be difficult to stay one step ahead of. That's particularly true for people, journalists, for example, that powerful interests want to keep tabs on. Ron Deibert is a professor of political science at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. He's also director of the Citizen Lab, which is at the forefront of studying this kind of surveillance. And he joins us now from the provincial capital. And Ron, it's always good to have you on our program. How are you doing these days?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Steve. Glad to be here again with you.
Glad to hear it. At the end of last year, your Citizen Lab became an almost daily reference point on newscasts, if you can believe it, in Poland. How come?
Well, in a nutshell, we discovered that five in total, originally it was three, members of Poland's opposition parties and movements had their devices hacked with a spyware called Pegasus, which is sold by an Israeli-based mercenary surveillance firm called NSO Group. Citizen Lab's research has unearthed many cases around the world of abuse of this particular very powerful surveillance technology that's sold by companies like NSO Group to government clients. In this case, it appears that, as I said, members of the opposition, senior lawyers, prosecutor, other people in Poland's opposition had their phones hacked and data surreptitiously, gathered from their devices. This is now a scandal in Poland. They're calling it Poland's Watergate. So, yeah, very much our research was at the center of this because we forensically examined the devices of these five individuals and showed that their devices were hacked multiple times each, numerous times each, in some cases leading up to parliamentary elections in 2019 as part of their activities in Poland.
Did you find out who the client was?
No, that's often difficult to trace in the same way. So if you look at what evidence we have in front of us, we examine a phone, look carefully at the logs, we can see definitively, okay, this device was hacked by this particular spyware technology. Outside of that, you're looking at circumstantial evidence. So first of all, and there's a lot of it, I should say. So first of all, NSO Group itself claims they only sell to government clients. So that rules out anyone but a government. Back in 2018, we did some internet network scanning to identify potential government clients and observed that there was one operating in Poland that was targeting only Polish targets. And then the fact that these five individuals would only be of interest, we assume, to the government that is in power in Poland, that they're in opposition to, high degree of confidence that, this is the ruling party in Poland that's responsible for this. Although ultimately, only a serious independent commission could determine something like that definitively.
And even then, you couldn't actually be sure if it were the Polish government or the party in power. Those are, I guess technically two different things most of the time, yes?
It could be a rogue security agency. We've seen other country contexts. Mexico comes to mind, for example, where you have widespread abusive hacking of journalists, human rights defenders, activists, even academics in Mexico. And what is known about how the technology was purchased and controlled in that country context, many different agencies, many different players could be responsible for it. We did have an admission by the leader of the present Polish party that's in power in Poland saying, yes, we did buy Pegasus. So we know we have a confirmation that they used it, although they're saying it's nonsense that it was used against the people that we discovered it was used against. Obviously, that's not a credible claim because when you look at the forensic evidence, as we have, definitively they were hacked. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing towards Poland's ruling party behind this.
And typically in these cases, if you're trying to hack into somebody's phone, in this case, the Polish opposition party, what kind of information are they looking for?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, the way I would answer that is by describing the capabilities that this type of spyware provides to a government client operator. So, when you hack into a device using Pegasus, which is probably the most sophisticated mercenary spyware technology in the world today, first of all, it leaves no trace. This particular version of Pegasus involved no interaction on the part of the target. They simply commandeered the device silently, so the target wouldn't be aware that there's somebody else, a spy in their pocket, if you will. Once you're inside that device, you can do virtually anything and more, really, than a user can do. So that means you can read every email, every text message, even those that are end to end encrypted. You can turn on the camera, you can turn on the audio capture, effectively turning that device into a bug. You could also plant falsely incriminating information if you so desire. I'm not saying that happened in this case, but the prospect is certainly there. So there's a whole range of things that can be done. Speaking to the question you asked, one of the victims, a prominent senator who was leading the opposition in the 2019 elections and whose phone we determined was hacked multiple times with Pegasus, his confidential information was actually broadcast out of context over Polish state media to try to paint a picture of him that was unflattering and perhaps corrupt. So that speaks to what you're asking here. What are the possibilities? Well, you can certainly spy on someone, engage in espionage, but you can also gather information, taint it in various ways, leak it, broadcast it out of context to falsely incriminate somebody.
Well, you are painting a picture of something that I have seen described as the most powerful cyber weapon in the world. Do you agree with that characterization?
Yes, absolutely. That was an analysis done by Google's Project Zero team. This is like their high-tech threat intelligence team. They did a breakdown of Pegasus based on actually a disclosure that the Citizen Lab made. We captured Pegasus in the wild last year and disclosed it to Apple. Google Project Zero did a breakdown of it, and they said this is by far the most sophisticated piece of surveillance technology that they had ever seen.
Now, Pegasus is that sort of mythical horse with wings. Why do they call this thing Pegasus?
I don't know. That's some branding exercise by the company itself. I have no idea. All I can say is this is very powerful technology sold by a very lucrative company, makes a lot of money, a lot of revenue from this type of sale to government clients who, have a insatiable appetite. I mean, you can imagine, just think about how I describe this type of technology. If you put yourself in the position of a government security agency, how addictive that would be once you start, spying on someone, gathering information. You want to do more of it. And this surveillance technology is sold on a license basis. So how many victims do you want to hack? Well, it'll cost you X dollars.
Now, your Citizen Lab has initiated something called the Pegasus Project. What's that all about?
The Pegasus Project is a consortium of journalists and NGOs, especially Amnesty International, that came together to work on investigating abuses of Pegasus spyware. Actually, the Citizen Lab's role in that particular project is more of a supportive one. We did a peer review of some of their methodology and the forensic analysis that they did. So we're not behind it, if you will. Although I will say that the Citizen Lab actually did the very first public evidence-based report on NSO Group back in 2016. We really kicked off investigations into NSO Group and have done extensive reporting ever since. Pegasus Project actually was given by a whistleblower a list of 50,000 phone numbers, which appears to be a list that is for reconnaissance of potential targets. Some of the people on that list actually had their phones hacked. Amnesty International has a tech lab similar to Citizen Lab using similar methodologies. They did forensic analysis and determined that some people on that list had their phones hacked. The big takeaway here is that you have this very powerful technology, and NSO Group is but one company in a very large marketplace of of other companies providing similar technologies that is largely unregulated and prone to widespread abuse. And that's because most of the government clients lack oversight of their security agencies. Maybe they're authoritarian or autocrats. And we've seen extensive abuse of this type of technology targeting journalists, human rights defenders, lawyers, and others.
Well, here's where it gets tricky because, of course, the Israeli manufacturer says, don't blame us. And NSO says, well, all our stuff is government authorized, so don't look at us. We're not the bad guy here. So as we try to understand who the bad guy is here, who's on your list?
Well, multiple parties are on the list, I would say. First of all, that type of rationale from NSO Group simply doesn't fly today. We wouldn't accept that type of reasoning from any other industrial sector, frankly. It just doesn't hold water in the 21st century. The UN has something called the Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, which makes it clear that companies are responsible for the products and services that they sell that may be then misused. And right now we're seeing many individuals who have been targeted with Pegasus put that test to the claim because they're actually litigating, they're suing NSO Group for the harms that they've experienced. But I will say, to just repeat what I said before, NSO Group is just one company coming from one jurisdiction in a global industry. It's a big marketplace that's growing in leaps and bounds. It's not the only company. So part of the responsibility lies with governments. So all governments have a stake in this marketplace. Many of them contract out with companies like NSO Group, including Canada and the United States. When we engage in cyber espionage abroad, we don't necessarily do it all in-house. We have to contract out to private companies. And the reality has been that governments have stayed away, they shied away from opening up regulation of this highly sensitive area, which is very much in the center of espionage activities, which are traditionally in the shadows. And so we're seeing, a whole set of harmful consequences as a result of this lack of government regulation, principled governance over this very potentially harmful industry and marketplace.
Now, in its defense, the NSO Group did say last fall that it had canceled agreements with 5 countries/governments because they had, quote unquote, betrayed trust. And I wonder what inference you draw from that.
Well, I don't take much of what they say seriously because, frankly, their responses to Citizen Labs reports and other groups' reports have been to largely, obfuscate, cast aspersions on researchers, not really meaningfully address what is in front of us. So, for example, we discovered and verified that many close confidants of the murdered Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi had their phones hacked with Pegasus. There is no doubt about it, including both his wife and his fiance and a Canadian permanent resident. You may recall Omar Abdulaziz, who was a close friend of Jamal's prior to his gruesome execution. When asked about this, NSO Group swears up and down that their technology was not used to hack Jamal Khashoggi's phone. Well, we don't know what happened to Jamal Khashoggi's device, but we do know everyone around him was hacked, and they don't address that directly. There are many, many other examples of that. One other one I'll give you, we discovered that New York Times journalist Ben Hubbard, who covers Saudi Arabia, wrote a book on Mohammed bin Salman, had his phone targeted with Pegasus back in 2018. NSO Group swore up and down that Citizen Lab was mistaken, this is impossible, blah, blah, blah. And then while that was going on, we later on did an extensive forensic analysis of Hubbard's phone using new methods that we have, and verified that his phone was hacked not once, but multiple times, including right in the midst of when NSO Group claimed that this was impossible. So this is a company that's obfuscating because they're not really held to account for it in anything other than the type of public interest research that the Citizen Lab is doing right now and the court cases that are underway.
But can we conclude that because they canceled those 5 contracts with those 5 governments/countries, that they do understand, the NSO Group does understand that, that they have a problem here?
I think they perceive the problem as a public relations problem, not a problem of harm having to do with their products. That's the problem here. They tried to dance around any evidence that's brought into the public domain about the fact that their technology was implicated in these gruesome, horrible cases of human rights abuse. The other thing is, we know for a fact that they are selling to serial abusers of their technology. Mexico is a case in point. There are numerous reports of the Citizen Lab front page of World News, New York Times, that expose these harms. And then they would go back and sell again, and we would discover new harms. Same with Saudi Arabia. So I don't, like I said before, I really don't think it's even useful to ask the company questions at this point in time. They lack all credibility. By the way, there is an equity fund that owns NSO Group. We should be asking that equity fund these questions as well. But the reality now, we're not going to solve this problem by trying to persuade this company to do good. Even if they started doing good, there'd be other companies that would step into their shoes to do harm. So we've got a clear market failure problem here. I see this as the biggest crisis for global civil society right now, the unbridled use of this incredibly invasive technology. Once you get inside somebody's device, you're effectively inside their heads, you're inside their social networks, you're inside their family. And that requires robust oversight mechanisms that are frankly entirely absent right now, although there are some positive developments, I would say.
Well, let me ask you, Ron, one of these sort of on the one hand, on the other hand questions. You know, you have clearly pointed out, on the one hand, it's probably not a great thing to have journalists or political activists or people who are doing human rights work. I don't think we want them spied on. On the other hand, you know, governments also use this technology in order to keep an eye on terrorism or narco trafficking or get inside criminal organizations. Can we categorically say then that there is no positive use for this technology?
I can't categorically say that there's no positive use for it. I have, many colleagues, there are many people in the human rights space that believe and advocate that there should be an outright ban on this type of technology. The reality is that we live in a very dangerous world. We need law enforcement to do their jobs. We expect intelligence agencies to gather information about pressing security threats, and they are going to use these technologies to investigate crimes. So I don't think it's realistic to say that we should just do away with them. We have to begin with the assumption that they're going to be out there. So what we need to do is make sure that they're not abused, that law enforcement and intelligence agencies stay within their lanes. That's easier to do in a place like Canada or the United States or Europe or the UK than it is a place like Saudi Arabia or Mexico or Rwanda, Nigeria, all of the other clients of NSO Group. So what do you do there? Well, we have to ensure that in addition to having robust domestic oversight over our police agencies' use of surveillance technologies, we need to ensure that there are strong export controls, that governments, in this case it would be Israel, don't just rubber stamp the sale of this technology. I should say that in Canada, there really is no safeguard against the Canadian export of this type of technology either. So maybe there's no Canadian company selling it right now, but I expect there could be, in which case, at the very least, Canada should be leading in this area, setting very high standards. And as I said before, our own intelligence agencies procure this type of technology from vendors. One thing that we could do is establish something like the US Commerce Department recently did, which is an allow and deny list. So you say, these companies, you're not allowed to do business with here in the United States. They recently put NSO Group and several other hack-for-hire mercenary surveillance firms on this deny list. And it had a big impact on their business, as you might expect. I would hope that other countries would do similar things. And if we do, we begin to claw away at some of the ways in which this market is now simply a Wild West, causing all sorts of harm.
I'm interested, though, that unlike Edward Snowden, who wants a complete ban on this kind of thing, you have said, no, we just need more robust government oversight. Why aren't you prepared to go for the full-out ban like patriot/traitor Snowden is?
Well, I think that it's not practical. That's the main reason for me. And I would debate with someone like Ed that whether it's even desirable or not. This is an extremely powerful technology in the ways that I described. Once you get inside somebody's device, you have access to their entire world. And that needs to be treated with an extreme degree of caution. I would say this is the digital equivalent of nuclear weapons in a way. Just as with nuclear weapons, we can say we can wish that they didn't exist. We can't put the science back in the bottle, so to speak.
Hmm.
So what do we do then? Well, we have to treat it in a step-by-step manner. And obviously, the place to begin is by regulating it properly, which is a good thing because we live in a liberal democracy, which is defined by, among other things, checks and balances around the state. And that's what's absent here right now. And as a consequence, we're seeing enormous harm.
Ron, we're down to our last few minutes here, and I want to ask you about something that the Citizen Lab is working on. You're about to release, I gather, a new report about quote unquote digital transnational repression. What does that mean?
Well, in ways, it's exactly what we've been talking about. There are many people who live in autocratic regimes or authoritarian countries and have fled abroad, fled to places like Canada for their safety, trying to make a new home for themselves and their family, safe from the gaze of the tyrants and the despots that they used to be subjected to. But what we're finding is, thanks to this type of technology and other methods, authoritarians are able to reach across borders and continue the type of repression that they used to only be able to do mostly within their borders. So that's the digital transnational repression. Our report was actually motivated by our investigations into a few Canadians who had been hacked by government adversaries from abroad. And what we noticed is that, they were experiencing psychological harm, trauma, if you will. If you think about it, imagine if you learned that your phone was hacked and maybe someone was murdered as a consequence of what the adversaries learned from your private communications. You'd be horrified, you might be traumatized. We also learned that a lot of these people aren't receiving help here in Canada for this type of problem, and they should, we believe. So we did extensive interviews with a number of subjects and asked them questions about their experiences, either being targeted or having their devices hacked in the manners that I just described. And we've come up with a number of recommendations to hopefully improve the situation here in Canada.
Are you able to say which Canadians had their phones hacked in this case?
Well, I can say for the ones that agree to go public, yes. Omar Abdulaziz, who I just mentioned, was a very close confidant of Jamal Khashoggi. The rest of the people, we have to do research under research ethics protocols at the university that guarantees anonymity to the people who are human subjects in the research. I can tell you though, these are people coming from China, from Tibet, from Rwanda. Horrible transnational repression using NSO's Pegasus by Paul Kagame in Rwanda, often combined with death squads, and people from Syria, Iran. So, this is a global problem that's impacting people that we have welcomed here in Canada and we have an obligation, we believe, to support.
And just finally, I presume that Canadian authorities know that this kind of thing is happening. Are they intending to do anything about it?
Well, we hope so. That's we make a number of recommendations to guide Canadian authorities to better help these type of people. I mean, one of the problems is we have a domestic intelligence agency, CSIS, in this country, not a law enforcement agency. And they often treat these type of people more as intelligence assets than people they should help, which actually amplifies the problem rather than alleviating it. And then when it comes to law enforcement, almost all of these people that we interviewed said that they tried to phone the police because of the experiences that they encountered, harassment online, et cetera, and the police just shrugged it off in almost every single case. So we need to educate law enforcement about this problem and make sure there are resources to help people who experience this.
Gotcha. Ron, we always appreciate your visits to our program. You are the director of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, and you're welcome on our program anytime. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me again.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.